All right, so setting up the front end, what folder must I introduce? Client. How do I install Create React app into a pre-made folder? I can say Create React app, but if I say client here, it's going to make another client folder and put it inside of my client folder. So how do I say make one here? Dot. Create React app dot space dot, and it says create it in the folder I'm currently in. Since I was in the client folder when I did that command, it'll make it in here. We'll let that go for a second here. Am I missing any files on my back end that might be important? Back end. What am I missing here? I'm missing one file. Git ignore. We're going to ignore the node modules. It doesn't look like I am because I'm not in a repository, but this is what you'd want to do, especially with your new projects, since they are their own repository. Front end is built. What front end dependencies will I need? Front end dependencies. Axios. Express. No, not Express. React Router DOM and Axios should be all we need at this point. Now, any NPM package is open to you. If you want to add functionality to your site and you find an NPM package for it, install it and use it. These are just the necessities for this project. React Router DOM and Axios. Great. Now, initial setup. What do I need to add and where on my front end so that it can talk to my back end? Package JSON and add a proxy. And I usually do it right after this one, so I know I'm not inside of anything else. So I'll say proxy it to my local host, port number 7000, because that's what my server is running on. Now I can start my front end. Is my back end started yet? No. I need to open up a second console, make sure I'm not in the client folder, and do Nodemon server.js. Now I have both consoles running. And I did that after I added the proxy, because this proxy is only taken account of when you first start up your server. So if you add it while your server's going, you have to stop and restart your front end for this to take effect. Okay, we're going to clear out the source folder, make an index.js. I haven't done this in a few days. And a simple app.js. And we'll just keep it functional based unless we find a reason to make it a class. All right, rethinking organization. This site has authors and books. Ooh. So we're gonna focus on books at the time being. We're not gonna let them search by author. We're just gonna map out our books when they load. Keep this simple to start off with. So if I know I'm gonna be maintaining book data, what folder must I or will I probably introduce over here? Okay, so components will be one for all my components. And context. So context is for what kind of state? Maybe that's too broad of a question. Context is for global state, things that many components would need, and functionality many components would need. So when I write my context for books, would I put my handle change and my handle submit and my inputs for my form inside of context? Why wouldn't I put those in context? Only the form needs it. Why do I provide it to my whole app if my whole app doesn't need it? Right. So what would be in my state, in my context? My books. That may be all that it maintains, but that's where I'm going to put all the functionality and data, is in my books context. Okay, so we're thinking this out. I want multiple pages. I want the home page to maybe load the books. So how do I implement that routing feature? The first thing I'd have to add to the app, something I import here, browser router, and I provide my app with the browser router. Cool. In my app, what are the two components from React Router DOM I need here to create my actual routing? Route. So I'll set that up. I'll say my website's going to have a switch, and I would absolutely start with this. Don't build out your whole homepage and then realize I don't have routing yet and have to refactor. Start off with routes, and then once you have your route to your homepage built, then start building your homepage, just so the mechanism is set up. This is essentially boilerplate code at this point. You're going to have routing unless your site is purely one page that you just scroll up and down on. But that's just a static site. This is a web application. It's going to have routing. It's going to have complexity. And we put routes inside. Now, what are the two props that every route needs? Path and component, or the better word that we could use, render. And I'm just going to use that from now on so we memorize the syntax. Well, if this is the path to the home page, what must we make this path? Exact path to /. And that's going to give us the props from React Router, so I'll call them router props. And we'll pass that into our home page. Like so. Well, home doesn't exist, so I now know my next task. Build this component. I'm thinking ahead though. I'm going to say import home from my components folder, home.js, and then I'll go make it work. And I technically start everything off as a functional unless I have a very clear vision of why it has to be a class. It's not a whole lot of work to change it to a class that it needs to be. Whoa. All right, so at this point, we have basic routing set up. I want to make sure it works, so I go to my website that's currently running, and I see home, so now it works. And what could I do in here to see if I can route to another page? I could add a link, but I could also test the URL. Say, maybe there's going to be an about page. If I go there, does home disappear? That means my switch is working. I gave my front end routing an endpoint it didn't recognize and it didn't load. But I go back to / and my page loads. Now, is this the same thing as our express routes? They look the same, don't they? They're / We can use parameters. No, front-end routing is specific, again, it's specific to frameworks, single-page applications, because everything from your website's loaded in the browser when the website loads, so we need a way to navigate around it. Well, the way that navigation was done in the past was through endpoints on the back end. We'd request a new web page. So they take this format and they built front-end packages that simulate that effect. So these routes have nothing to do with our backend routes. This just formulates what the user sees in the URL and navigates between certain pages. What mechanism actually interacts with our backend routes? Axios. So if this is front-end routing, Axios will be backend routing. At this point, we're about ready to start our context because we'd like home to list out all of our books by default. So I'll go to my context folder and create, what would I call this file? Book what? What is the name of our context file? Provider, book provider. And what kind of component will it be? Class, because we need state. Class, book provider. And we stop at the return because that's where this changes. We export our book provider. How do I create a context and what do I call it? Yeah, I could take provider and consumer out, but if I don't do that, what's a good name for it? Let's just call it what the data it is and then context. And the reason why I'm not deconstructing this into provider and consumer is because when we go over React hooks, we can't deconstruct it. We need this full variable available to us. So I'm just going to keep it that way so we get used to the syntax. And we create a React dot create context. So now we have a book context, and this is an object with what two components? Provider and consumer. Okay. So what does my book provider component return? Which component does it return? Starts with book. Starts with book and ends with context. But what portion of the context are we returning? Provider. Okay, so we made a component called book provider because what it does is it will wrap the book context provider around one of our components. It isn't the provider, it is the thing that uses the provider to provide to our app. So how do we say you're going to be wrapped around another component? What's the line in here? Props.children. This.props.children if it's a class, props.children if it's functional. Now, how does the book provider know what it's providing? There's one prop we need to give it. The value. Yeah, it's been a minute, right? Like this is all like a week and a half ago. All right, so we give it a value prop, which has to be an object. And whatever we put in this object is what's going to be provided. Okay, well, what state did we say we're going to maintain in here? Books. Cool. And as far as methods go, so we're thinking about what functionality have we built into books so far. It's defined by our backend routes. So I can go to my routes, my book router. I've provided the ability to get all books by an author, get all books in general, post a new book, and like a book. Yeah, so we got to think of a method for each of these. And this is what goes in context, the global handling, because the ability to get books might be needed on multiple pages. The ability to like books is definitely book related. And what do all of these routes send back when they're done? They send back a status, but they always send back either an array of books or a singular book. So that updates our backend state, which means the methods that handle these routes have to be in the provider in this context because it will receive the new data from the backend and need to update the right piece of state. If those methods aren't in this file, the response will come back and our backend state looks fine, but our front end state has no way to update so the user knows. So pretty much everything that interacts with routes is going to be inside of my provider. Things like forms, so handle change, handle submit, I'll write that in its own little state, in its own little form component, because only that form needs it. So what would be a good name for a function that gets all books? Okay, good idea. Let's do it. Get all books, and we're going to interact with our own backend here. What do I need to import to do this? Sounds like a Harry Potter spell. Axios. From Axios. And we're going to do an axios.get, and if I want to get all my books, what is my endpoint? If I don't know, where do I check? First, I'll go to my server. Okay, the endpoint to hit my books is here. Then I look at the book router, and I want to get all books, just /. So /books is my endpoint. So make a GET request to /books. It'll come back with a response, which we'll console log, or it'll come back with an error. What's that? Yeah, that is why a proxy basically says look for an HTTP request that doesn't start with the protocol, doesn't start with HTTP, and proxy it through the thing that I tell you to. So it'll automatically put the localhost line right before this and proxy it over. Okay, get all books. We have the method, but we need to get this to the home page. So first, we need to make sure it's provided. Where do I put this to make sure it's being provided? In the value object. So I'll say, you're going to provide something called get all books, and what it references is this function. And now I need to provide my app with the ability to get this data. So where am I actually going to go use my book provider? Where does this go? I mean, it can go a couple of places, but where have we conventionally been putting it? In the index, just like the browser router that provides the React router props. So we're going to import book provider from our context folder, book provider. And we're going to wrap that around the app as well. You definitely can, yeah. Yep, I could wrap this directly around this component right here, and that way only the home is able to consume. But when we're building these smaller apps, it's nice to put it here because then by default, any component can consume. So it doesn't have to go here. If only one page needed it, I could just go and wrap just the home page with the provider and it has it. Just like the way I have it indexed, yeah. When I wrap it around app, I'm saying any component, including app, now has the ability to consume. But I have not built the ability to consume. What must I do on this file? We're using the provider to provide, but where's our book context consumer? Yeah, we got to make this fun function. Hey, export const book, or what do we call this method? With something, so we'll call it with books. There's a function that takes in what as an argument. It's a higher order function, so what is it probably taking as an argument? A function, which we're calling C because a component is a function and capital C is the React syntax. Okay, what does this function immediately return? What does with books return? What comes immediately? Like, you said the right word, you said props, but what is this actually? What is this? It returns a function. It's a function that takes a function and returns a function. The syntax is harder to see with the double fat arrow, I'll give you that. But this is what's being returned when we call with books, is anything after this arrow. So what we're returning is a function that can still take props, because components have to be able to take props. And later, when we actually use this function, it wraps the book context consumer around our component and provides the value from the provider. So we're going to call with books, and we're going to give it our app component or our home component, and it's going to return this function from the file, so that when we import it in another file, we're still going to call it home, but really it's this function at this point. And when we use it, it gets all the data from the consumer and any props we gave it and returns our component with all that data.
Question.
Yeah.
I guess the thing I'm trying to hard to visualize is that you're exporting this with books. Well, the present method is going to like thing, but I guess it's kind of like when you actually use context. I guess trying to visualize which water goes where.
Yeah, so provider always has to be above the consumer because it's like a trickle down effect. Whatever this is wrapped around, anything it's wrapped around or below has the ability to consume it. So let's go use this. This is in the top level. This is wrapped around our app.js. So we'll go use this in the book file or in the home file. So we get our book context. So in home, we can import with books from our context book provider file. And we can export default with books. So realize what's happening here if you can. Let's just run through it one more time. When this file reads, it does not export default home immediately because JavaScript is going to evaluate this function first. So it's going to call this function and pass in our home component. Provider will receive it and return this component, this function. So this is actually what's being exported right here. Our app.js, we're importing it, and this is where we're actually calling it. So when we're calling home right here, we're actually calling this function. We can still give it props. We'll still be calling it book because that's what we imported it as, but it will, under the hood, now wrap it in the consumer and give it all the props it needs. You do that like 20 more times and it will start like, oh, that still doesn't make sense, dang it. Yeah.
It's actually being carried all the way down from the context.
Yes. Well, more like warped to it, but yes. And it gives it to us in props. So now I should be able to console log props in home, go to my home page and see that data. So I'm on home, open up the context, see our console log of props. We have get all books. And then what's history, location, and match? Where do those come from? Router props, yep. But get all books, that's our method. Great. Well, our books should probably be in here as well. So where do I need to add this to make sure it's being provided? Yep, add it to the object. Great. Well, I would like to call get all books when the home page loads and then map them out. So what do I need to do with home here? Got to get a class because we need them lifecycle methods. Do we need state at this point? At this point, we may eventually, but our books have a state already in context and they have a method already. So this file will just be able to use it. It won't need its own state just yet. So I want to call this method when the home page loads. How do I refer to this now inside of the home page? It puts it in props. So this dot props if we're in a class, props if we're in a functional, and then it's just the name of the method, get all books. Now this is going to go get all the books and save it in state. So how would I then map out the books here? Yeah. For each book, let's just return right now in H1 with the book dot, and I forget what we called it. So fortunately, we wrote it. We can just go check the model. Title. It also needs the author, but that's only for posting. We're just getting. Perfect. Book dot title, and we'll put in the key for the book dot ID. Let's go see our app. We'll refresh. and something's not working. We're looking at our book provider. It's like, cool, it's console logging to us our response data, which, hey, there are my books. Where would I look to see why this isn't showing up? Where does the data start? Where does this books data actually begin? Provider, the thing that we just called to get it. Now, why am I not seeing the books show up on the page?
Just express.
That's just console logging.
Oh, you're not really saving.
I'm not updating state. Yeah. So this dot set state, make books, the response dot data. And now they're showing up. So one more time to follow the flow of logic here. The home page loads, component did mount goes out, or sorry, home page loads, render is called, and at this point, props.books is an empty array, so we see nothing. But now that the component is mounted, component did mount fires and says get all books. It goes to the provider, it calls get all books, it does the get request, comes back and updates state. So books is now a full array, which updates the value that's being provided. So home consuming it gets the updated value. This map reruns and we see the data. So if I were to console.log hi right here, how many times did that console log when my app loads? Twice. Twice is correct. Because the page loads once, it renders, but then component did mount fires and gets the books, which causes a set state, which causes a re-render. So render gets called again and actually shows the data. So the second console log is when the data is there and it shows up. Cool. Questions on the get and setting up the provider. Is it still kind of hard to see how these pieces are tied together? Yeah. That's why in this project, you'll absolutely want to just use context because it only gets easier if you use it. Struggle through it a little bit, you'll be fine. I avoided Redux for a good week and a half after they taught it because I'm like, no way. And then I got put in my place. It's like, no, you need to learn it. And after a day or two of struggling, it was fine. Context is the same way. You just gotta use it a couple times. And then you realize, just like in home, where I'm saying this.props.books.map and this.props.getAllBooks, it's the same thing as if I had state in here and had this.state.books.map and my this.getAllBooks to get the data. I've just moved this and this to another file, but I'm still using it the same way. I just have to reference it differently.
I guess my question is, I get how to fetch stuff and lower components for when you actually need to do like say post. You actually need to track the content.
Let's do it. Post and then lunch. Yeah, post and then lunch. So our website's going to stay simple. We're going to stay on the home page to post books as well. It's almost like a to-do page. Wonderful. So I want the ability to post, and I'm going to use home for this, for at least the setup. So what component or components would I want to make? Form. And we're going to make this the add book form. We're not going to break this up and modularize it. We're just going to put everything in here, the add book form. And this will be a functional component. What's that? Yeah, you could to like generate the content for it. The functionality, that's another 20 minutes though. So maybe later. So where am I going to put the state for this form? Because I need a handle change, I need a handle submit, and I need the inputs managed in state. So what am I going to use to do that? We want to keep it local. Why, again, why wouldn't I put it in context? Only my form needs it. Why plug up context with all that? Let's keep this to get all books, add book, delete book, update book, like book, you know, all the actions and the data where it's interacting with. Let's keep it in here. But if it's something just, you know, small functionality wise, I think we could make home maintain the input state, the handle change and handle submit, and then use the form here, pass that data down to it, but then it's still local state. Now we have a reason to give home some state. And what are the two methods we'll need to make for the form? Now we're gonna have a little bit of an issue with this because we have to build out a little bit more in order to get the author ID available to us as well. It wouldn't be too much more. We just may turn off the required for a second just to make the post work and then build in the author component. But what would I need to know? If I need to know what inputs are included, where again could I look? Yeah, I'll go look at my book schema. And it needs at least a title and maybe a genre for now is what we'll work with. So title and genre. Oh goodness. Okay, and I'll pull in my add book form from add book form. So title, what kind of input is that going to be? Text, the default. But for my genre, what am I going to want to do? Why select option? Well, it's an enum. We don't want them to accidentally write in the wrong word and have the post not work. So we'll have a option select drop down. And what are the enums possible? I'm just going to copy this so I have it for reference. We need one for fantasy, non-fiction, historical fiction, which I guess would probably just be fiction. Did I reverse them? I did. How come no one said anything? Oh, you said something. So the option is select. Select is option. Whew, that would have been sad.
I guess one thing, like, small, main order I have,
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so every input needs 3 props: name, value, and onChange, with checkboxes being the one alternative where value is instead checked. So on the input, what will the name be? Title, okay. The value will be that from state, so we'll fill that in, and then it will also get the onChange, so that we'll fill that in. But on the select option, what gets the name, what gets the onChange, and what gets the value? So what does the select get? Name, which will be genre, and onChange. So each option then gets its own value to say this is what this option represents. So what should the value of fantasy be? Fantasy. But will this work? These are my enums. Has to be the same case. So this is how I'm enforcing this post request to work. When they click fantasy, this is the actual value, and that's what my backend is expecting. So now I can just tie that into the rest of these. Value, this one is non-fiction.
So the user can screw it up by
And always expect a user to screw it up. So if you can avoid that, you're good. You're well better off than trusting them.
Or pretty much, you have to, or impose in, don't assume that they're no guy. Like, if you don't get to this, right?
Is that how you spell required?
Yeah.
Nice. Folder title. All right, so it's going to have to receive some props, and then we'll tie them in. So home, we'll put in our add book form, and we'll give the props it needs. So it needs everything from state, it needs title and genre, and it needs handle change and handle submit. So we'll pass all of these down. Okay, handle change. Let's remember, what do we need from the event object? The name and the value from what part of the event object? The target. And then we can say this dot set state, update the input name with the input's value. Name will be either title or genre, and the value will be whatever they've selected for that field. Handle submit. Prevent default. This is where we're gonna finish off the form and then build this in and go to lunch. So if we're thinking, what is handle submit gonna have to do? Okay, but where's our book state position? Context, so where are we gonna write this functionality other than creating the new object? This is gonna be context. This we can do here because we have that data here locally, but then we're gonna have to send this new object to context. So context can make the request and update the right piece of state accordingly. So we've passed all the props down, let's get those tied in, and then we will work on that. So we'll deconstruct them, and we'll change, handle submit, title, and genre from props. And now value for title can be title, value for, oh, we don't need genre, actually. Nice. On changes, though, we need that. And then we need the on submit, handle submit. Nice. Quite the little form we've got here. We haven't tested it all, so let's see. Hey, look, it's there. It's working. Great. Good test. Book provider, because now when they click this submit button, wait, where is my submit button? Okay, when they click, it's right there. When they click this submit button, the chain reaction needs to send that data to context. Context needs to post that to the database, needs to receive the response from our API, update state, and that whole process is what makes them hit click and have a new book appear. It's a big work for a little payoff, but it's required, or it's expected. So let's create the new object to send to the database. Const new book equals an object. And what will its title be? Yeah, the title that they just entered and handle change updated for us. And same with the genre. But interestingly enough, isn't this dot state already looking exactly like new book? So I don't necessarily need to do this. I could say new book equals this dot state, or I could just send this dot state. We'll separate it because it's a little easier to look at right now. But then all of this needs to be in context. So let's go build that ability. We'll go to the book provider. Now we have another thing we need to do with books. Add new book. What will this method need to receive as a parameter? What object? A new book object. This is the thing I'm going to give you so you can send it in a post request. Axios.post to books. And second argument, the book, this is, how are we referring to this on the back end? Rec.body. Okay. Dot then, console log of response. Dot catch, console log the error. We'll make sure our app has access to this, so we'll add it to the provider value. And now we know home is receiving that through props. So we can now send the post request. This.props. Add new book, and we'll send it the new book. That will be sent to our provider. It'll receive it, send it in the post request. And why again are we doing this method in context? Why does it have to be in this file? I need to update this when it's all said and done. All right, this post request is going to fail though, until we edit something for a little brief moment. We said books require an author. We'll re-implement this later. Because I just like to be able to send books right now to make sure this works. And we're console logging the response, so let's see if this works. Hi. Oh, that hi is still there? Yeah. All right, new book. We got it. This is, what's that?
5 minutes.
Buy Milk. It's a good book. I believe it's in the historical fiction genre. Death of a Milkman. And we'll submit 404 not found. That's a bummer. What does 404 mean? Not found, yeah, okay. So where would I check? I'll look at my request. I'm sending this to /books. It's a post request. Well, I'll go look at my server. Okay, it is books. Well, what is my post request? Ah, the author ID. Ah, darn. So we're gonna make up an author ID because we'd have to change this. That's changing too much. We'll re-implement this and not fix it later. So we know our endpoint is wrong because it's expecting something after this, another /. So we're gonna say this is author that, or hard coding it. This is bad form. And that, now I feel like I shouldn't even be doing that. Okay. Put myself in a corner. Yeah, let's just deal with it for now. Let's send the book, Buy Milk, historical fiction, and submit. Internal server error, 500, blah, blah, blah. Okay, where do I go when I see an internal server error? Neither. We go to the server console to see what was the error. Object ID failed for this because it needs to be a... We're going to take this feature out until we come back to it. So you don't need an author, and your endpoint doesn't need an author ID. So we're going to comment this out, and we're going to cut this out. For now, we will come back. Let's just make this thing work. Submit. Oh, I'm still sending it. Where's the provider? Oh, this video is going to be embarrassing. All right, post the books. Buy Milk. Oh, thank you. Hey, look, good status. Created. Data. There's our new book. How come it didn't show up for the user, though?
Because it's not saving the array.
Yeah, same old story. I'm not updating this array. So what is the appropriate way to say keep everything that was in the array and also add this new item, res.data? Yeah, so I'm going to open this up a bit and say this dot set state. I'm going to give it previous state as in the function, parentheses, curly brackets, and I'll say update books to be a new array with everything that books used to have, and also the new book. And how do I reference the new book? Do I want to use this one? No, this doesn't have an ID or a version number yet. This hasn't gone to the database and back. So where is the new book with the ID? Res.data. Huzzah. By beef, it is a sci-fi. And there we go, by lots of beef. And now I need to implement delete because I hit post too many times and I didn't clear my for. Let's just do that. Let's clear our state once the form goes out and call this good. So go add the new book and then set this local state as well. Give me this. Okay. A lot of stuff.